A new Star Wars movie has come out, The People vs. George Lucas. Now I have some problems with all three prequels in the Star Wars saga. I also have issues with Return of the Jedi and believe that most of the changes made to the original trilogy didn't improve things, and that some of those changes made things worse. Now, I realize that my opinions on these specific aspects of these movies is subjective, but I am entitled to them, as we all are. The freedom to voice opinions about art, especially very popular art, is crucial to society. But let's face it, George Lucas bashing has gotten completely out of control. And when I say that, I don't mean it's out of control because of how negative the criticism is, but rather that the overall amount of criticism that he receives is out of proportion to the criticism of any other artist ever in the history of art or criticism. It's not the job of geeks to pick something and hate it. It's our job to hate everything. But so-called geeks are letting everyone off the hook today except for George Lucas. There's no statute of limitations on suckiness, but just because it remains acceptable to slam Return of the Jedi doesn't mean that it's okay to let bygones be bygones with Superman 3. Putting Richard Pryor in a Superman film is so obviously a dumb idea that the only possible reason I can come up with for the decision was that it was planted in the minds of Warner Brothers executives through a 5-level Inception plot. I can just imagine the pitch meeting. Hey, let's take two things that are awesome and ruin them both. Now let's talk about the drop in quality from Star Trek IV to Star Trek V. It doesn't take a William Shatner scholar to know that you never want to let this guy anywhere near the other side of the camera. This movie was a warp factor 10 shark jump, and yet complaining about it today is virtually non-existent. I'm sorry, but the needs of the many outweigh the needs of Shatner's ego. And let's talk about RoboCop 2. Brought to you by the guy who directed The Empire Strikes Back, folks, and with a script by Frank Miller. And not the current Lost His Marbles Frank Miller, but the 80s Daredevil Frank Miller. How was it that this movie was so horrible and so disappointing, and yet no one is still complaining about it? And while we're talking about Frank Miller, what the hell happened with The Dark Knight Strikes Again? Did I just dream that? As I was reading those issues, all I could think of is, gee, what Photoshop plugin is this page going to be an excuse for? The Wachowski brothers raped your 1999. They did. They did it twice, and you liked it. Or else there would be more discussion of the suckiness of the Matrix sequels on the fanboy rape crisis hotline known as the internet. And then the Wachowski brothers raped anime fans from the 60s. Casting Emile Hirsch as Speed Racer? Are you kidding me? I can't believe how hung up we are on Jake Lloyd when Emile Hirsch's acting sucks up more life and energy than Galactus. The 70s was a magical time in filmmaking, arguably the best decade ever for film. If George Lucas has slipped a notch since then that must be in stark contrast to his contemporaries, who have given us nothing but solid gold since. Hogwash. Michael Ritchie, who directed Smile, The Bad News Bears, The Candidate, he went on to give us Cops and Robertsons. William Friedkin, who directed The Exorcist, The French Connection, Sorcerer, he went on to do Jade and Rules of Engagement. Sidney Lumet, of Network, Serpico, and Dog Day Afternoon fame, he found himself behind the camera for A Stranger Among Us. Anyone see this piece of crap where Melanie Griffith plays a cop who goes undercover as a Hasidic Jew? Let me say that again. Melanie Griffith as a cop. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that George Lucas made some misguided decisions in the prequels. I still believe that he cared. Was Francis Ford Coppola even trying when he made Godfather 3? If you've seen his work in Jack with Robin Williams and Bram Stoker's Dracula, then you know the answer is yes. He was trying his ass off. He just sucks now. I will put Jar Jar Binks up against any scene with Keanu Reeves in that Dracula movie. You are simply not allowed to erase these travesties from the history books and then whine about midichlorians. The outrage we should be expressing over these artistic crimes has apparently been frozen in carbonite. Why are none of these filmmakers or ruined franchises being tarred with the same blogs as George Lucas? For their descent into the Sarlacc pit of quality is far greater. Come on, geeks. You've become a group of lazy fucking posers. You don't get to complain about Star Wars and then punch off the clock. Not when there's so much else to hate. Not when Diane Warren was allowed to write a theme for a Star Trek series. Not when the last Transformers movie introduced skids and mudflap. Not when the Seth Rogen Green Hornet movie got greenlit. And not when we live in a universe that produced Final Crisis Issue 7. Is there a drop in quality between episodes 4 and 5 and the 4 films that came afterwards? Sure, they're not as good as Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. But let's face it, neither is most of the art ever produced by man.